Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. This is Snap Judgments presented by Buyers Auto. It's another commitment edition for Ohio State as the Buckeyes advance to number 24 in their recruiting class with the commitment of Newberry, Florida defensive tackle Jarquez Carter. He is a 6'2", 6'3", 270-pound defensive tackle. A little bit undersized, Andrew, but very quick, very strong. He was the strongest man. He won the big man weight challenge at the Rivals 5-star camp in June, bench pressing the 225 27 times. Pretty good. That's like NFL combine type of numbers. But a guy that is not going to blow a lot of people away on the ranking side of things. Jarquez Carter, Rivals has him as the number 15 ranked defensive lineman in the country, defensive tackle wise. But On3 has him at number 46, 247 has him at number 44, ESPN at 24. So the opinions vary on, the upside, the ceiling. I think a lot of those rankings are based a little bit on the size. I mean, there's no way around that. He's not your prototypical 6'4", 315-pound Southern defensive tackle. But as the Buckeyes have seen with players like Caden McDonald, who are slightly undersized coming out of the South, sometimes that's what you have to have happen to get a guy out of the South. And he is now commitment number 3 on the defensive tackles position for Larry Johnson, all of them in the last 3 weeks, with Trey Janodam, with Maxwell Roy, and now with Jarquez Carter. 25 offers. He picks Ohio State over Florida, Miami, Penn State, UCF, Rutgers, who's been very involved. And I normally would scoff at that, but they have a pretty good recruiting class right now, all things considered. We'll see how it finishes up. But first thoughts, Andrew, as Ohio State adds commitment number 24.
So my initial thoughts are offer sheet is impressive, as you said. I think that 6'2", 6'3" height listing is probably a bit generous, which we see a lot with recruits, whether it's a defensive tackle, wide receiver, whatever. But when you watch his tape, despite being a bit undersized, he's extremely fast. As you said, he's very strong. He's quick. I don't know if I would compare him to like maybe a higher upside BB Landers or somebody like that, or maybe even like a smaller Mike Hall. He's going to be one of those 3 techs that can rush the passer, affect the passing game, that kind of thing. Like you said, 4-star on Rivals, and I think he's a 4-star in the composite, but several sites do have him as a 3-star.
Yep.
I think we just haven't talked a ton about him. He did like a midweek official visit. Is that right?
Yep. Well, he did like a Tuesday, Wednesday official visit on June 17th and 18th. And it was one that it actually happened. Ohio State and Jarquez were not sure if that was going to be an official visit or an unofficial visit. They ended up scheduling it as an official visit like 4 days ahead of time. And to your point, like it has not been talked about a lot. And I think some of that reason is because the Maxwell Roy commitment, because of the Trey Janodam commitment. And there was certainly a belief that, at least initially, that Ohio State would not bring in both of those guys. And then they bring in both of them. And last week when we were on Talking Stuff, we said, hey, I don't know if there's going to be room at the end here for Jarquez Carter, because the widespread belief is that Ohio State is holding on to a spot for Malik Autry and or Jakeem Stewart, so I don't see a world where you'd take 5 defensive tackles, but if Malik Autry and Jakeem Stewart wanted to commit, then it wouldn't matter if Ohio State had 7 other defensive tackles. They would take those 2. So this to me feels like a security blanket, sort of an insurance policy in a class that needed 3 or at least 3 defensive tackles. And now you have them, but you're still able to go out and go take the big swings after Malik Autry or Jakeem Stewart if he reclassifies in this fall.
Yeah, and as far as Malik Autry goes, you just keep telling him he's different than the 3 guys you got committed. He's that massive 1 tech. He's just a different body type than those guys, and quite frankly, he's more highly touted than those guys as well. But I agree. We talked a couple weeks ago, and it seemed as though we kind of brushed Jarquez Carter to the side, not because he's a bad player, but just because it seemed like they were going to hold steady with the 2 they had, and then wait for Autry and Stewart. But obviously Larry Johnson sees something here. They're going to be losing some talent at the position to the NFL draft coming up here in several months. But I just, after watching his tape, I like the quickness and stuff like that. So I get why they took this kid. I know other schools are going to be using this against Ohio State when it comes to Autry and Stewart. They've got 3 already. But I assume Larry Johnson can counter that and say, well, this is how you're going to be used. This is how you are different than the three we have.
Right. There's obviously the difference is that Malik Autry is a surefire one tech and a guy that Ohio State sees as a contributor next year. Whereas with Odom, with Maxwell Roy, and now with Jarquez Carter, that's a little bit more of a longer development arc. And so you can certainly see why it would be. I think the comparison to Robert Landers is apt. I mean, I've never stood next to Jarquez Carter. I know people have. I think I've heard it, maybe 6'1.5", maybe touching 6'2", which is what he's listed at, but that's irrelevant. Ohio State has stood next to him. They have been able to do their research and they like him. And again, it to me, the biggest thing about this is it shows a shift in the fundamental philosophy that Ohio State has in this class, because now you have commitment number 24. You have 3 defensive tackles. As already said, they would take 2 more if those 2 want in. That this class now, when we were speculating that it could get to 25 to 27, and now I think you could look at 29 to 30 maybe if everything shook out the way that Ohio State wants. So that's pretty telling and pretty different as far as the philosophy that Ryan Day and his coaching staff is taking into this season. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we have thousands of things to say about Jarquez Carter. It's a good win for Ohio State, picking him up over Miami, who really wanted him, Penn State, who really wanted him, Florida, who really wanted him, UCF. Like that's a big win. But the question of most people are going to have is like, what's next, right? Like, what's next? That's always the question when someone commits. So now Ohio State with 24 commitments, and we'll turn this into a mini episode of Talking Stuff, although this is Snap Judgments presented by Buyers Auto. You have 24 commitments. You have a decision coming on August 17th from David Sanders. You have a late August decision coming from Messiah Delhomme. You have a late August decision coming from wide receiver Phillip Bell out in California. I personally think if Ohio State pushes for Bell and Delhomme, that they will get both of them. That takes you to 26 commitments. David Sanders, who I still believe Ohio State should be considered the favorite at this point, takes you to 27. And then if you objectively look at the recruiting class, there's still a need for another offensive lineman, maybe 2. There is still the question of what happens with Preston Bowman. Is he out there? Is he a guy that you can still bring in even though he would be at that point the 5th wide receiver? There's the question of Turbo Rogers or Shakai Mills-Knight at running back, who both of those guys are expected to visit Ohio State again. And the Buckeyes appear to be the only school that really has a shot to flip Turbo Rogers from Alabama. And then there's the questions about Autry and Jakeem Stewart. There's a potential still for an additional 3rd cornerback. Like you could be talking 31 guys in this class. And I think that they would take that many, which is, again, a fundamental just shift in Ryan Day's philosophy that I think is extremely interesting. And I am excited to get an opportunity to try to sit down and pick some brains about exactly why they're going that way. Obviously, we can look at the roster and project to the NFL draft next year. The amount of turnover and attrition in the transfer portal, I think, is only going to continue to go up every single year. This year is a little bit different because of the clear-cut national championship opportunity for Ohio State. And I think a lot of guys maybe that would have transferred in a different year decided to come back because there's so much on the table for this year. But Andrew, I mean, like we've been talking for years about, it's just a class they're finally going to go big. And it seems like this is the class they're finally going to go big.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely seems like it's happening, which I am not going to complain about. And I think the rest of the fan base feels the same way. And you didn't even mention guys like Justin Hill and Dorian Brew, that they're certainly going to continue recruiting as well. I am all for this. It's going to be an interesting 4 to 5 months leading up to December when you've already got a class of 24, but still, potentially 6 spots left. But as we sit here now, it just all, and we've been saying this for, months now, it's all about David Sanders. And I've seen panic on the message boards, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, about that last weekend in July where the kids can go and make some visits. And some schools are already, planning visits and stuff like that, or events, barbecues, picnics, whatever. And I believe it was Steve Wiltfong that sort of hinted at David Sanders is going to be somewhere that week. And the backlash on the forums were, well, why is Justin Fry just kind of sitting around? Why doesn't Ohio State have something planned? And my thought on that is, just based on how David Sanders has handled his recruitment, I don't think it matters if for him to go to some big event where they're having a barbecue or a gathering or whatever. Like, just because Ohio State's not doing that doesn't mean he can't come to campus with his family and meet with Justin Fry and meet with Ryan Day and do that. I almost feel like that would be preferred for the type of recruitment that's been. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the visit that really moved the dial for Ohio State with David Sanders was the May 3rd visit to Ohio State, where no one was there except for him. And I think that's the preference again. I think there was some discussion about maybe Shakai Mills-Knight visiting next week or at the end of July. I don't know if there's a specific date for that, but I mean, there's a 1 week window where Ohio State can host players. But as far as hosting a big event, and while I think I understand the clamoring for it from the fan base to say, hey, if you have an opportunity to open up the doors of campus and bring in a bunch of guys, go ahead and do it. For me, I think I understand that there's not a lot to gain for Ohio State in the class of 2025 in doing that. I look back to last year when Ohio State had their barbecue and bash at the end of July, and Chris Henry Jr. committed walking outside, right? Like, I think that the only thing that I would really want Ohio State to do, and again, this is not my decision, obviously, I've said before, last week's Talking Stuff, to me, if they don't do something, I think it's a mistake, but it's not really my decision. And I think I understand their justification for it, which is essentially players aren't going to be here. Coaches are, we're just getting back from vacations, trying to prepare for practice, which starts at the end of that week. This next coming week also runs into Big Ten Media Days. It's a little bit of a jumble. But I think you could use that time to bring in the class of 2026 kids from Ohio, like the Victor Singletons, the Albert Hills, the Jacob Weatherspoons, the Jacoby Clappers, the offensive linemen like Sam Greer, Max Riley, even Will Conroy, who has Ohio State now not in his top 5 schools. Like, we can talk about that on this episode of Snap Judgments as well, which is we're now turning into a mini Talking Stuff. I would use it for that. I don't think that it is really necessary as far as the recruitment of David Sanders to bring him on campus and while people are having a picnic. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that matters. I don't think he's going to be, well, I'm not going to come to this school because they don't have a basket full of honey and cheese. You know what I mean? Like, who gives a about that? Like, this is now. That said, I do expect that we will see David Sanders make visits next week. And Steve Wiltfong said as much as well. Ohio State is trying to get one of those. There's discussion about it. We'll see if it plays out. I think what's going to be interesting, and I've heard, Andrew, that maybe he will take trips to like Nebraska that week and Clemson or Georgia, and maybe the teams that are not right at the top of the list in order to just double check those vibes. Which to me, and this is just me trying to read the room, if he does that, then I feel more confident that he's already made a decision between Ohio State and Tennessee. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. But I can tell you, if that happens, if that kid visits Georgia during that week, I mean, there's going to be a freak out, probably the same level of him visiting Tennessee, just because it's Georgia. But I'm with you on that. If that's what happens, because those schools are presumed to be, I don't want to say just outside of his top 2, I guess. So I'm with you. If that happens and he doesn't make it to Knoxville or to Columbus, I can see that happening. And I don't think that would be the worst thing in the world for Ohio State's chances.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about this new era of the recruiting world is that there's a lot of people who are almost outthinking themselves and like, you can enjoy the process, I think, and a lot of people are doing that, especially when you have had like a month off and you get a chance to recharge the batteries a little bit. But I think then when you go into it and say, hey, now we're going to make a visit here, here, and here, that there's at least a chance for you to confuse yourself a little bit and to make things a little bit harder than they need to be, or perhaps adding puzzle pieces that maybe you thought you'd already removed. And I just think that either, I don't think you do that unless you're either A, 100% not sure of your choice, or B, sure of your choice. Does that, again, maybe I'm just reading it wrong. Who knows? But either way, I know Ohio State is trying to get David Sanders on campus at some point during that July 24th through July 31st week. But the Buckeyes are sending all of their, a lot of their guys on the team are going home, getting in their final opportunities to spend some time with family before practice starts on August 1st. So like it is a whirlwind last week. But they are trying for sure to get them on campus. I can confirm that their discussions have at least started and are taking place. But whatever happens with David Sanders, whatever happens with Messiah Delhomme, whatever happens with Phillip Bell, like it does really shape up nicely for Ohio State. I mean, obviously you want to land all those guys, but even if you don't, like, you enter the college football season with a completely fresh recruiting board, and you say, now we need X, Y, and Z. Now we can go evaluate them in the season. And it's worked out pretty perfect in this cycle for Ohio State as far as just figuring out exactly, let's get to the finish line. That finish line, as they see it, is the end of July or the end of August. And they're certainly shaping up for what should be a really great class. I think they've been passed up by Alabama on some of the national rankings because Alabama's just gone crazy in the last month. But we'll see how that plays out from here to signing day. But what is clear is that with Jarquez Carter in the class, with these big three decisions coming in the last 2 weeks of August, and then it's a reset, and then it's evaluate the board, and then it's see if we can find a guy in Ohio or in the Midwest that, it has a big senior year. You keep recruiting Justin Hill and maybe Dorian Brew and see how things work out with those guys. The Dorian Brew thing, I think, took a tiny hit on Wednesday when DJ Pickett picked LSU over Oregon, and the vibe that we were getting with Dorian Brew, he didn't want to be part of a 3-man class where maybe he wasn't a surefire number one guy. We'll see how that plays out. Now let's just do a quick 4-minute offense that we would normally do on Talking Stuff. What else is on your mind as we head into the final weekend before a 1-week open period?
So you mentioned Will Conroy, 2026 offensive lineman, a bit. We've talked a lot about the 2026 class and how, especially with offensive line and cornerback, it could just be like almost a full Ohio flavor for that class. Do you get the vibe that he's just maybe, and like, as you said, Ohio State did not make his final or top schools list or whatever. Oddly enough, he was crystal balled to Oregon, and then Oregon also did not make his top schools list. So I just am kind of confused as to what's going on there. Do you have any take on like what's happening there? Was he maybe the 4th best of the in-state linemen compared to some of those other guys, or what?
He probably is, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't a priority for Ohio State. I mean, he's a different position. He's a center. He's being recruited somewhat differently because he's a center. Like, he's a surefire center. From what I've heard, and a lot of things can change. It's July of 2024. He can't sign anywhere till December of 2025. So Ohio State's going to keep recruiting him. I know that for a fact. They like him a lot. They like his work ethic. They like the St. Ignatius program. They like Charles Bentley being his trainer. I've heard that there are some questions from the Conroy camp about Ohio State's ability to develop offensive linemen. Whether fair or unfair, that certainly, if you look at his top group of schools, you can see that they are the schools that in the last couple of years have been pretty productive when it comes to pumping NFL linemen into the draft. I think it is interesting because people expect that LaCharles Bentley, who is his trainer and like leading him in this process, would be helping Ohio State. And I don't know that he's helping in any way, shape, or form. Not to say he's intentionally putting Ohio State on blast or hurting Ohio State, but he's not in any sense of the word like pushing Will Conroy to Ohio State. So that's you wish you had that if you're Ohio State, but you don't. So development is one thing I heard was a concern. And the second one was that I heard that there was just not a lot of interaction with the entire coaching staff at Ohio State, and that it has been it has felt maybe a little segmented, and like there's Justin Fry's recruiting him, and then I don't think he's really had a time yet to get it connected with the rest of the staff. But that's the case for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's a 2026 prospect. The open period, the full communication period has only been underway for 1 month, and that started obviously June 15th. He chose not to make any visits to Ohio State in the summer. It did not want to come camp, did not want to do those sorts of things. So, the window to connect is small, and Ohio State, I think, has just not done a great job of getting like the whole staff involved in his recruitment, which we'll see. If they want him, then they're going to have to show him. And I don't know that anyone other than Justin Fry at this point has been involved.
So kind of the opposite of the Justin Hill situation where you have like too many guys coming at him. In this case, it's sort of the opposite. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think kids equate like how many graphics you get sent towards you or how many coaches you have reaching out equating to how badly a school wants you. And maybe that's right. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But what I do know is that those are two things I've heard directly from sources about that recruitment and where maybe Ohio State has not been able to, make that. I mean, Justin Fry, I was at Ignatius at the end of April on a 6 a.m. to watch a workout there, and Justin Fry was there, and those two did not seem to have any sort of lost affection. They seemed to be pretty they enjoyed talking to each other, and I will, after I talked to him that day, was all very, very positive about Justin Fry. So whatever happened in the last month, maybe just a lack of attention from Ohio State as they went through the process trying to figure out their 2025 class. I don't know. But they're not going to stop recruiting Will Conroy. That's what I've been told.
So, and I know these guys are only going to be juniors, but do you get a feel just talking to Ohio State, like how they're prioritizing the in-state guys at offensive line? Like, do they have like a top 1, 2, 3 as far as like who they view as the most important, or maybe just who you think might be the top of the list?
No, I mean, I think that this is actually the problem. And there is this weird balancing act you have to do, because I don't think in an ideal world, Ohio State would offer anybody that early. Like they offered Maxwell Riley, and Sam Greer, like after their freshman years. Like they want to see these guys in their junior year before they offer. But nowadays you really can't wait that long because of what we're seeing with Will Conroy. Like the love coming from the outside part of the recruitment is so chaotic that you feel impelled to make early offers. But they also then don't push then for commitments because they are like, hey, let's see how this works out. I would think that Maxwell Riley is the most polished of that group right now as an offensive lineman. And so to me, he would be priority one. I really like Adam Guthrie, who they've not offered in the state. I think he's got a potential to maybe be the best of them, to be honest. I mean, from a full perspective, we'll see how that plays out. Sam Greer has had some difficulty staying on the field. That's sort of slowed his evaluation process. But he has elite and prototypical size and athleticism. So like, I think if you look at him as a prospect, he's probably the best one. So, but he's also maybe got a longer path to playing time. So I think you can go about it either way. The bottom line is Justin Fry needs to sign 5 offensive linemen in next year's class. And there are a lot of really good ones in the state. And so whether it's not Will Conroy or whatever, I mean, if it's Riley and Greer and Adam Guthrie, who they've not offered. And again, I think maybe it's a situation where they're waiting to see game 1 or game 2 of his junior year to see how he looks on the field because they like what they've seen in camp settings. Deron Parks is another one. Like there's a lot of dudes in the state that they really like. So it should set up to be an easy class for Justin Fry. But as we're finding out more and more, recruiting in the year 2024 is not like it was in 2012. Like these kids are not in love with Ohio State the way and they have an opportunity to go anywhere they want, and money is there and television is everywhere. Like it's not the same. And so I don't want to say that Ohio State's taking things for granted because I don't think that they are. But I do think that there comes a time when you have to make a conscious decision to say Ohio or bust. And if you bust, then you have to just deal with it and say, you know what? Okay, we didn't want to go after these guys that early, so we didn't. And there's like this weird PR battle of, do we get embarrassed if a kid chooses another school if we didn't offer him? But then everyone thinks we should, because then it's I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Kind of weird.
I'll ask one more question. We're way over 4 minutes, as we tend to do with these. Sticking 2026, so many quarterbacks have come off the board since the spring, really. Last week, I think it was Jonas Williams, the Illinois quarterback, put out a top 4. I was kind of surprised to see Ohio State on that list. I think he was supposed to come to a camp and no-showed or wasn't there for one reason or another. But Ohio State is on the list, along with Oregon, LSU, and Alabama. Is that just a situation where Ohio State's the clear number 4, or is that even worth watching in your eyes?
I think they are the number 4 in that group, and I'm almost tempted to say they're just a hat on the table at that point, and one that Alabama and Oregon and LSU want to be on the table with them, because it looks good to beat Ohio State for a quarterback. The relationship between Jonas Williams and Chip Kelly is developing, but it has not like taken off yet. Well, he was supposed to be at the Under Armour camp in Ohio in Canton at the end of April, did not make it. Was supposed to camp at Ohio State in June, did not make it. Unless he gets on campus like in the next week or so, I don't see it happening. He said, I've seen it said that he was going to take visits to all those schools this fall. My personal gut feeling is that he will make a decision probably by the end of this month and be off the board, because the numbers are dwindling so fast at quarterback and the opportunities are dwindling so fast. I think that someone is going to put him in a position where they say, if you want to be our quarterback, you've got to do it right now. And Ohio State is not going to do that. And so my personal vibe is that he will probably actually not be even available by the beginning of August. So back to the drawing board.
So the search continues.
Yeah, it's going to be a weird one. I mean, I said before, it's going to feel a little bit like the 2023 class. That's one that might go into, the early part of 2025 before you start to feel really confident. But that's good for Ohio State in a lot of ways, because they get to watch everyone's junior film. They do not ever want to offer quarterbacks who have not played even their junior season of high school yet. Like, I'm telling you, the history of the guys that they've done that with has not been good. And if I'm not going to sit here and name names, but if you look back at the last decade of recruiting quarterbacks for Ohio State, the guys that they've offered super early generally has not panned out for Ohio State. So that's where things are. So anyway, this is Snap Judgments presented by Buyers Auto. This has been a Snap Judgments talking about Jarquez Carter, commitment number 24 for Ohio State, and throwing in a little extra stuff here just to give you folks at home listening or watching on YouTube or listening in your cars a little bit to chew on. So that's what we're doing here today. That's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Thank you for watching this episode, and we look forward to talking to you again later. Have a good one, everyone.